Monday like he already owned it, though nobody had told him that yet. I watched from the corridor, tailored jacket, expensive hair product, scrolling his phone with the confidence of a man who has never once been told no. He was the CEO's son-in-law, married into Ridgeview Bioformulations 8 months earlier, and now he was going to run it. My name is Clara Bennett. I joined Ridgeview as a junior formulation chemist 19 years ago. 19 years does not feel long when you love the work. It feels like Tuesday, then Wednesday, then a decade has quietly passed while you were busy solving problems nobody else wanted to touch. I worked through 2 CEOs, 4 restructures, a near bankruptcy, and a regulatory crisis that nearly cost us our license. I stayed late. I came in on Christmas Eve when a batch failed and no one else answered the phone. Because I believed in what Ridgeview built, a compounding pharmacy serving patients who could not get standard medications, children needing custom doses, elderly patients whose bodies could not tolerate ordinary formulations. Ethan did not care about any of that. He was named Chief Operations Officer that March with no announcement and no process. Our outgoing COO, Patricia, who had mentored me for 6 years, quietly cleared her desk one afternoon, and by morning, Ethan had her office, her parking spot, and a new plaque installed overnight. When I asked HR whether there had been a selection process, I was told the position had simply been filled internally. He had never worked in pharmaceutical manufacturing, I pointed out. Hospitality management, she replied, without irony. At his first staff meeting that April, Ethan told us Ridgeview had been operating from a scarcity mindset and needed to shift toward growth-first culture. He used the word pivot 4 times in 11 minutes, talked about optimizing client touchpoints, and never once mentioned patients or the fact that we produced medications going directly into human bodies. When our senior technician, Robert, raised concerns that a 40% production increase would create contamination risk, Ethan smiled and called it a fixed mindset. By June, I had filed 3 written safety concerns, each answered with a 2-line non-answer. By August, Ethan had dismantled the pre-batch review process our former chief formulation officer had built 15 years earlier after a dispensing error that once hospitalized a patient. He called it legacy red tape. I called it the reason we had not hurt anyone in 15 years. That September, I was called into his office at 9:14 in the morning, still in my lab coat. He did not offer me a seat. "This isn't personal, Clara," he said, the 4 words that always mean the opposite. My role was being disestablished. HR had prepared my final paperwork, and I was welcome to collect my things. 19 years, a near bankruptcy survived. Offers from bigger companies turned down out of loyalty, half the technical staff trained by my own hands, and he could not even remember whose office had come before his. I asked if he knew about the intellectual property provisions in my original 2006 contract. He blinked, clearly clueless, and told me HR had everything in order. I nodded, hugged Robert goodbye, packed a single box, and walked out at 10:48 that morning. I did not cry because I had learned long ago that the moment you let someone see you broken, they stop seeing what you built and only see the breaking. What I had not told Ethan, what I decided he could discover on his own, was true long before I ever walked through Ridgeview's doors. Back in 2003, during my honors year in pharmaceutical science, I developed a stability testing methodology for complex multi-compound formulations, addressing a real gap in how small compounding operations handled batch consistency for high-risk medications. I filed a patent under my maiden name in 2005, granted the following year, right as I joined Ridgeview under my newly married name. In the chaos of a marriage and a career at once, I never updated the registration. In 2009, our old CEO found the patent through a literature search, traced it to me, and we formalized a licensing agreement acknowledging that I personally held the intellectual property Ridgeview had quietly built its entire operation around. That agreement had been renewed 3 times, most recently in 2021, set to expire that December, 4 months after Ethan fired me. I did not call a lawyer that first afternoon. I went home, made tea, sat in my garden, and thought about the patients this methodology protected, about what a rushed production increase without proper safeguards might mean for someone depending on their medication being exactly right. Then I called my attorney, Josephine, who had handled my original filing decades earlier. She went quiet, then said plainly, "They are operating under a license that expires in 4 months, and they just fired the person who owns the patent. I want to be clear, this was never about revenge. I never wanted Ridgeview to fail. I had spent 19 years trying to make it succeed. I wanted the work done properly, patients kept safe, and the people who built things treated with dignity. So in late November, I formally notified Ridgeview's legal team that the license would expire December 31st and would not be renewed under current terms, attaching the original patent and every renewal record. That email landed in the CEO's inbox, Ethan's father-in-law Richard Hale, at 3:17 on a Tuesday, and the reaction was not calm. Robert texted me that evening. "They are asking for your number," was all it said. Over the following 3 weeks, Ridgeview's legal team combed through their own records with gathering dread, realizing exactly what they stood to lose. My methodology was woven through their primary batch verification process, their high-risk formulation protocols, and their regulatory compliance documentation. There was no simple substitute. Ethan, I was told, had grown very quiet during the legal briefing and had reportedly asked who Clara Bennett actually was. In January, my attorney and I sat across from Ridgeview's legal team and their newly hired technical director, who clearly understood what had happened and looked deeply uncomfortable about it. Richard attended personally, having by then understood fully what his son-in-law had done. Ethan was notably absent. Over 2 sessions, we reached a new licensing arrangement reflecting the methodology's actual value, formal acknowledgement of my authorship, and a consultancy role going forward. I negotiated firmly but never cruelly, because the worst outcome for anyone, especially the patients, would have been Ridgeview scrambling to replace safety protocols in a panic. The one condition I insisted on above all else was full reinstatement of the pre-batch verification process Ethan had dismantled. Their new technical director agreed immediately, admitting he had been trying to reinstate it since his first week, blocked each time by Ethan. Ethan resigned that February. I do not know the details and I do not need them. That March, I was invited to speak at a regional pharmaceutical symposium about methodology documentation and intellectual property protection, a subject that had apparently become rather timely. I stood before a room of people who understood what it meant to compound medication for a child who needed something that did not exist in standard form. And I talked about what happens when institutional knowledge simply walks out the door in a cardboard box because nobody bothered to understand what they were losing. A young woman afterward asked how I had stayed calm instead of exploding. Exploding would have made it about me, I told her, and the work was never about me. Robert came too, sneaking coffee past the venue's no outside drinks policy, and told me proudly the new technical director had bought him a better coffee machine for the lab. Small things matter. Looking back now, I think about it often. Not with bitterness, which genuinely surprises me, but with clear-eyed understanding of how these situations unfold. What struck me most was not Ethan's arrogance or even Richard's failure of oversight, but how completely everyone in that building had stopped asking what the place was actually for. A compounding pharmacy is not, at its core, a revenue growth vehicle. It is where people with urgent medical needs go when standard options have already failed them. Every verification step exists because something once went badly wrong without it. And that knowledge does not live in a manual. It lives in the people who were present when it happened and built the safeguards afterward. Fire those people without understanding what they carry, and you do not just lose an employee, you lose the institutional memory that keeps other people alive. I am not angry at Ethan. Not really. I have examined that feeling carefully enough to trust it. What I feel instead is tired. Tired of a culture that mistakes loyalty for obsolescence and looks at 2 decades of devotion and sees only a line item to cut. If there is a lesson here, it is to document your work not defensively, but because what you carry has value beyond your own memory of it. To know the real worth of what you have built long before someone tries to underestimate it, and to remember that being underestimated, while never comfortable, leaves your hands entirely free. My name is Clara Bennett Whitmore. I am 50 years old. My patent is now licensed to 9 compounding operations across the country. I consult directly for 3 of them, and I am developing a second methodology with a university research team, making certain this time everyone in the room knows exactly whose name belongs on the work. Last spring, I received a card from a mother whose daughter has a rare metabolic condition, requiring a compounded formulation built on my original protocols. It simply said the medication had stayed consistent for 3 years and her daughter was doing well. I keep that card on my desk next to an old coffee mug and a photograph of my family. A quiet reminder that some things matter far more than a parking space and a plaque on a door, and that some names last a great deal longer than the people who forgot to ever ask what they meant. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments which moment hit you the hardest, and tell me where you are watching from tonight. This has been another story from the Revenge Tales. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.